Hello and welcome to this tutorial on how to use the Serde library to serialize and deserialize Rust structures into JSON strings. So let's go ahead and create a new project with the cargo command. So cargo new Serde example. Let's change directory into this Serde example, and then let's open this project with our editor. Okay, as you can see here, we have the usual structure of a Rust project. We start from the cargo toml, and we add a couple of dependencies that we're gonna need in order to use the Serde library. Here you can see we have the Serde dependency and the Serde_JSON dependency. Let's go ahead and build this project just to make sure we have all the dependencies cached. So cargo build. Now, the first thing we need to do is obviously import the modules in our main file. So let's import the deserialize and serialize module from the Serde library, and then Serde JSON in order to be able to actually invoke some functions to serialize and deserialize structures into JSON strings. So in order to provide some meaningful examples, we're gonna use this definition of a structure. Let's pretend we have some work to do. This actually is a structure that could come from an hypothetical table called work. We have an ID column or field. We have some work code of type string. Let's pretend that we are supposed to add together numbers up to a certain upper bound. And then let's pretend we want to know if we are done or not in doing this kind of work. So the first thing we're going to do in our main function is to define an instance of this structure we defined before. And here, as you can see, we have ID1. So let's pretend this is the first row of the table. We have a full work code. We want to add up together numbers up to the 100 upper bound, and we're not yet done. Right, so in order to serialize this instance of a structure of type work into a JSON string, we're going to use the toString function of the Serde JSON, and we have to provide a pointer to our structure, to our instance, and then we're going to unwrap this and get our string type instance, and we're gonna use the print line macro to print this string via this placeholder. So let's go ahead and run this to see if it's going to work. So cargo run. And as you can see, we are able to provide a valid JSON string as an output that represents our original instance of type work. Now, in order to deserialize this into a new instance of type work, we're going to use the fromString function from the Serde JSON library. As you can see, this expects a pointer of a variable of type str. So we use this ND method from Rust to convert a string into a pointer to str. And then we're gonna use the macro printline to print this new structure of type work that is actually not implementing the display trait. So that's why we have to use this slightly more complicated definition for a placeholder when we print messages. So let's go ahead and run this to see if it works. And as you can see, we are able to print structures that are coming from a process of serialization and deserialization via the Serde library. Now, in order to be sure that actually this instance of a structure of type work is actually representing the same information as this instance of a structure of type work, we could use the assert macro to see if it throws any error. And here we're basically comparing the fields of this instance with the fields of this instance. We're gonna check that they represent the same information. So let's go ahead and run this. And as you can see, we're not throwing any errors, so we are sure that this instance is actually representing the same information as this instance. Now, we've seen this comment here, and let's take this example as a chance to implement the display trait for a structure of type work. So we're gonna be able to use a simpler notation when invoking the printline macro by providing a simpler placeholder, basically this one. So the way we could implement the display trait is this. So in here you can see we are implementing the display trait coming from the standard library. The function that we're going to implement is the format function, and here we're basically providing some sort of tabular representation of our structure in a string with some placeholders that are going to contain all the fields of our structure. And so let's go ahead and see if we are able to print this in a slightly simpler way. So here, as you can see, we're basically using the same chain of functions that we are using here. Basically, these are two very similar lines. And we store this new structure in a new variable. And then, as you can see here, we are printing this with the simplest version of the placeholder, the same one we used here when we were serializing our original structure into a JSON string. So let's go ahead and run this to see if it works. Perfect. And as you can see, here we are invoking the macro with this kind of placeholder, and here we are taking advantage of our implementation of the display trait in order to be able to print a different message. And that's it for today. Happy Rust coding to everyone, and I'll catch you on the next one.